For over 10 years now, I've been teaching and coaching thousands of people, and I've found that even the smartest people get fixated on certain limiting beliefs that keep coming up in whatever they're trying to achieve. In this video, I want to share the most common and the most damaging limiting beliefs I constantly encounter in people I work with. I'm willing to bet you've bought into at least one of these before, and maybe even now. Then I'll tell you how to change these beliefs so that they serve you instead of hurting you. There's a built-in bias in the human brain that more is better. This is the bias that leads us to buy more apps, download more templates, consume more content, thinking that if we just accumulate enough, things will get better. The reality is more stuff usually just creates clutter, expense, and complication in our lives. Consuming more content is usually, honestly, just a form of procrastination. It's a way to avoid the fear that we feel of taking the next most important step. I can still remember when this limiting belief showed up for me most tangibly. It was 2014, and I had just received my first big break as a writer. I was asked to do a writing residency and write 5 long-form articles for a popular blog called Ribbon Farm. And what happened is I felt like, okay, I really have to do this perfectly. And for that first article, I spent over 50 hours meticulously researching every possible source, reviewing hundreds of different notes. And what happened next was really interesting. For each subsequent article, I actually incorporated fewer sources and included fewer ideas and tried to make fewer arguments. And to my surprise, it actually went better. Not only did it take less time, was it less difficult for me to create, those subsequent articles received a more enthusiastic reception, better feedback, people enjoyed them more. More is not always better. Often in writing, it's better to make fewer points and fewer arguments, but ones that you really believe in and feel passionate about. There's this idea in our society and in our culture that ideas are born either good or bad. So everyone's running around trying to only come up with good ideas and avoid bad ideas. Every idea is bad when it's first born, especially the ones that will eventually be good. You have to take these initially bad ideas and develop them, refine them, iterate on them until some of them eventually will grow into their potential and become good ideas. I remember in the early days of building a second brain, I was so bad at explaining what it was. I would come up with these incredibly complicated explanations like, oh, you create a digital note-taking knowledge management system, externalize information brain. Like, it made no sense and was way too complicated. I would try to explain it to my friends or my family or my clients, and they would just say, that makes no sense. I just want to be more productive and efficient. But over really years, I slowly iterated on that explanation and distilled it until eventually I came up with this formulation of a second brain. It's externalizing the knowledge that's in your first brain into your second brain. And I really wonder, thinking back, if I had given up, if I had thought, oh, this isn't a good idea, people don't seem to be interested in it, doesn't seem to make sense. If I had given up on it, I would have missed out on really what has become the very cornerstone of my career that I've spent the last 10 years on. All information matters equally. This belief often leads people to spend a lot of time and energy capturing every bit of information around them, when in reality, a tiny percentage, say 1%, truly matters. Focus on capturing only the small bits of information that truly spark your interest. I remember when I used to read ebooks, I would save hundreds and hundreds of different passages. Basically, any sentence that I thought could ever be useful in the future, I would save in my notes. But here's the thing. I eventually found that when I had thousands of words of excerpts from a book, those notes were so voluminous, so extensive, that I would actually never have the time to go through them and find the nuggets of insight that I could actually use. Over time, I've actually found it more effective to save fewer and fewer highlights from my reading, because those notes, as a result, are much more succinct and therefore much easier to find little bits and pieces that I can use in my daily work. Order is a sign of progress. We often think that if someone's productivity looks good, with clean, minimalistic desktops, beautifully designed dashboards, color-coded bookshelves, that must mean that they're productive. But let me tell you, it's often not the case. See, action is always messy and chaotic. You have to kind of forget for a minute how things look and really dedicate all your attention to driving toward your goal. What matters in those situations is how quickly you can return to order once the dust settles. This one takes me all the way back to being a kid. I noticed that my father, who was a professional, lifelong artist, had a studio in the backyard of our home that was messy. There was paint splatters everywhere. His paints were kind of all mixing together haphazardly. The canvases were just stuffed in a corner. There was a little bit of order, but basically just enough order for him to get started on whatever painting he was working on. In contrast, when we go often to, let's say, friends of the family who were hobbyist artists, who were not professionals, they would have the most picture-perfect, clean workspace for their art that was clearly not being used. This contrast between professional artists and hobbyist artists really instilled in me this belief that there are often moments in creating anything where you have to just let go of how you look or how perfect it is. You have to let go of your need for control and certainty and really just throw yourself at whatever is sparking your imagination and what's exciting you so that you have a chance to be surprised and amazed at what comes out of that creative process. Consuming content makes you smarter. It's really tempting to think that consuming content will automatically make you smarter and more knowledgeable. I'm sorry to tell you, that's just not true. Content, information, reading, listening, it's all just theoretical until you actually put it into practice. Only then do you find out whether it's useful or even accurate. The only way to learn is to learn by doing. This brings to mind some honestly kind of painful memories from my early 20s. I was reading a few dating books because I had no dates. I was getting nowhere in my romantic life. And I remember reading these books full of, frameworks and techniques and advice and thinking, okay, now I really understand dating and how to do it effectively.
I thought you were somewhat attractive, but maybe too nerdy. I was like, not sure. And then one day.
But then there was an exact moment when I found out that all that knowledge was just theory, which is when I actually took action and asked someone out on a date.
You were like, hi, my name's Tiago. I remember we sat for like 2 hours talking.
And I remember sitting there on one of my first dates that I went on and thinking, I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what to talk about or what to do with my hands. And what that experience really showed me is that, reading and research is fine, it's great, you can learn a lot. But for so many arenas of life, you really only start the true learning process when you put yourself out there, when you take a risk, when you put something on the line, when you have something at stake. And all those things require going beyond the research and actually taking action in the real world, in your real life. My impact is proportional to my effort. Look, it's important to make your best effort, but often the biggest results don't come from the greatest effort. There are often these little shortcuts you can take to create a lot of value in very little time. You have to be open to taking what I think of as the path of least resistance when it opens up for you. I'll give you an example from this week. In a few weeks, we're going to be going camping in the mountains near Santa Barbara. And I realized we don't really know what camping gear we have. Do we have enough sleeping bags and quilts and tents and sleeping pads for our family, which is now 2 members bigger than the last time we went camping? So I thought to myself, I better create a comprehensive Notion database with all the different camping gear we have, what kind of product it is, when we bought it, what features it has, where it's located in the house. But then just the thought of that really enormous project drained me of energy and just made me think, oh God, I really do not want to do this. But then I remembered something. I had made a little shopping list, a little checklist of items that I wanted to buy online and different websites. I realized with just a little bit of minimal effort, I could actually go through, slightly reorganize that list of items that I had already purchased, and that checklist could easily be converted into kind of a quick and dirty catalog of all our camping gear. See, I didn't have to go directly to the ultimate, most comprehensive version of what I wanted to create. I could just take one step, just go slightly in generally the right direction and arrive at something that accomplished most of what I needed with a tiny fraction of the effort. There's not enough fill in the blank. If you look at all the limiting beliefs I've talked about so far, they are all manifestations of a single root cause: the fear that there's not enough of something. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough energy or opportunity or creativity or love. The scarcity mindset is the ultimate limiting belief that creates all the others. It's important to realize that the concept of enough is an invention of the human mind. We are the ones who decide what feels like enough. It's really a feeling, which means we have the ability to change our definition of what enough means. When I was a kid, growing up with an artist as a father, I naturally assumed that what it meant to be creative was to create visual art. So I would take out my little pieces of paper and my crayons and try to make drawings that honestly just were not very good. What that led me to believe was that creativity was limited, that I had a reservoir of creativity inside of myself, and the more that I used, the less that there would be left over. I don't know where I got this idea, but it actually led me to avoid being creative. I would avoid expressing myself because I thought the more I did so, the less there would be for me to draw on in the future. But once I did, it was like the floodgates were opened. I discovered that I have inside of me an infinite sea of ideas and insights and feelings and things that I want to express in the world. And actually, the more I expressed them, the more would arise from inside of me. I used writing to prove to myself a different story, that creativity wasn't this scarce, limited resource. It was actually a resource that the more I used it, the more would be produced. So, we've just busted some big limiting beliefs that might be holding you back. Now it's your turn. I want you to pick just one of these limiting beliefs that we talked about. Just one that most hit home for you. Got it? Good. Now, what is the opposite of that belief that you want to adopt instead? This takes some creativity because it still has to be plausible or else your logical mind won't accept it. Share the new version that you came up with in the comments. Your job is to find evidence for this new belief. What are the reasons to believe it might be true? What speaks in its favor? What experiences that you've had support it? This is where journaling and note-taking can be so powerful. They give you a private space to examine your thoughts and play with them to come up with potentially new ways of thinking. This is not an overnight transformation. And I can't tell you exactly when a given belief will change for you or how much evidence you'll need. But being honest and specific about which belief you want to change is the very first step. If this video got you thinking, share it with someone who could hold you accountable to examining your limiting beliefs going forward. And don't forget to subscribe for more.